Yes, hello everyone, and it's lovely to see some people here instead of talking to two people in the front row and empty seats otherwise, so that's a big positive. So I guess this week's been pretty interesting, really. Obviously with AFL footballers tested positive, which makes a bit of a mess of their next week or two, or who knows quite what goes on there. And in Australia, some states have had nothing or close to nothing, and one state in particular has had lots of cases. Across the world, as has been happening the last few weeks, things are still not looking all that great. And in fact, last Friday is so far the worst day for the world, over 150,000 new cases diagnosed. So if we look at where we're going in Australia, it looks pretty good, particularly in South Australia where we're opening things back up, and we've got later a slide going through some of the things that are moving forward for us. If we look at where the rest of the world is, it's not quite so much fun. And the World Health Organization in the last week has said that in their view, coronavirus is still accelerating. So we're not done yet if we look at it on the world stage. If we look at our lovely little picture here, you see the area in the middle at the bottom that's that blank sort of white space? Well, Australia sits actually right down the bottom end of that at the moment. 7,441 cases as of yesterday. So last week, in Australia, there were 135 new cases. 107 of them were in Victoria, which made up 79% of Australia's new cases. And while a number of those people were people in hotel quarantine from overseas, there were a lot of cases from inside the borders. And that's causing a bit of concern. The public health people are again quite worried that another week of that, and we're back to where we were in March. So people are being quite cautious and watchful of what's going on there. If we look across the world, as I said before the slides were working, we're now almost at 9 million people diagnosed, and that won't be everyone because there's been quite a lot of places where there weren't the capacity to test, and so that number is going to be much higher than that. And across the world, 465,000 people have lost their lives due to this illness. So you can see on that little infogram there really where things sit and which countries are running into the most trouble. On the next page, this is just looking at cumulative total cases. So I've put up a series of different graphics over the time, and some of the logarithmic scales. This one's just an accumulated number of cases. And the USA, there's actually two versions of this. If you look online on Worldometers, there's two versions of this graph. One has the USA, and when you have the USA, Brazil and everywhere else is this tiny little box in the corner. And so I decided to use the other one and actually draw the USA in. And really from about the 12th of March onwards, they've been just almost a straight upwards line. But if you look at the countries that still don't have control, or even the thought of control, places like Brazil, Russia, India, the UK's curve, they've never quite got that curve flat. Peru, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Colombia. A lot of people live in those countries, and in some of those countries the services are not all that easy to get hold of, and things are going to get overwhelmed in some of those countries, which isn't so great. So when we look at that, we realise just how fortunate we are in Australia. So really then we have to look at, we're still trying to find a path out of this. So how do we get out of this? Well, it's already been announced that it's extremely unlikely international borders will be open this year. And as we've seen this week, if cases go up, the restrictions must be increased. So in Victoria, as of midnight tonight, instead of being able to have 20 people in your house, you're back to 5 people if you live in Victoria. Instead of, they were going to be going upwards from 20 people to, I think it was 50 people for gatherings, and that's going to stay at 20 people. If you were going to get together with another family for a picnic in Victoria, instead of being able to get together with 20 people, that's going to be dropped back to 10 people. In South Australia, we're still going upwards. We're in step 2+ at the moment, as Pastor Chris said, and that's 300 people allowed into any facility with 75 maximum per room. And still the 4 metre squared rule, still the 1.5 metres, etc. Now, South Australia is a bit confusing at the moment. People think that borders open means there's free movement. Well, unfortunately, I mean, Victoria and New South Wales ACT, never shut their borders. So you can move freely between those 3 states, or those 2 states and territory, without any restriction. At the moment, the South Australian borders are now open for other states, but if we want to go to Queensland, their borders are currently not open to us. So you still have to quarantine on the way out, but when you come back, you wouldn't. We're hoping in the next 2 weeks that'll change. And again, that comes back to my third point there. If cases stay down, then the restrictions can decrease. So what does that mean for us individually? It means that we've all got a responsibility, personal responsibility, for how this pans out. And the 3 boxes at the bottom there, if you've got a cold or a flu, stay home, washing your hands and keeping the 1.5 metres. Now the interesting thing is, we need to make sure we do that at the individual level. If we don't, then the numbers keep going up, and then we can't blame somebody else when that happens. So this slide I've left in here because in my workplace this week I started running what I was calling sick kid clinics. So over lunchtime, goggles, gown, gloves, mask taped across my face, which then takes skin off when you pull it off 2 hours later, and ringing people on the phone in their cars, then getting them in, looking in ears and throat and sending them out. And I saw very quickly that a lot of people and a lot of schools still haven't worked out that if you're sick, it means 2 words. Stay home. It's really simple. It doesn't actually take any thought. If you wake up with a sniffle, get tested, stay home. And that's something that unfortunately we haven't quite got the message there, which is something that we can keep looking at as we move forward from this. And Darren's tip for this week, showing the way is showing love. So if we look in 1 John chapter 3, and this is out of the Amplified Bible, little children, let us not love merely in theory or in speech, but in deed and in truth, in practice and sincerity. So if you've got people with you today, if you're watching this from home, you've invited people over, then you've got a responsibility as the host to show them how to keep distance and the right things to do. Everyone here, I mean, we've had ushers here controlling the herd, but I think the ushers have had a pretty easy job because the individual responsibility of you as a person is to be aware of what your responsibility is. And I guess we don't want to go into any of the kick a Vic sort of things or why would you want to visit this place anyway sort of stuff, because we're all in this together. It doesn't matter if one state in Australia doesn't get control of this, then the whole of Australia is affected. Just like really if one country in the world doesn't get hold of this, then it's going to continue to circle and the rest of us can't go back to whatever normal's going to be. And I guess the last thought with showing the way being love is if you're listening to this and you're not part of our fellowship and the whole concept you've heard today of being filled with the Holy Spirit and what that means for you doesn't mean very much yet, then we'd love to show you the way to find that out as well. I'd just like to thank everyone again for listening, and hopefully I'll see you again next week.